Haven't you ever sat, perhaps in a rare moment of stillness, and felt that incessant noise inside your own head? That endless, compulsive chatter of the mind that comments, judges, plans, and regrets, a stream of consciousness that never, ever seems to stop. We seem to be desperate, many of us, for just a moment of true, profound silence, a real gap in that constant broadcast. And so, naturally, we begin to ask a very serious question, a question that perhaps has brought you here. What is the source of thought? How can I go to the very root of it, so that there is, at last, a possibility of silencing the thinking process itself? I understand this question. I really do. It feels like the most urgent, the most spiritual, the most human question one can ask. But I want to suggest to you gently that this may be the entirely wrong question. It is a question born from a deep misunderstanding, question that sets us on a path of conflict, because it immediately implies that you are some separate entity, some thinker, who stands apart from thought, and that this you can operate on thought, control it, suppress it, or destroy it. You see the trap. You have set up a battle inside your own house, the thinker versus the thought, a battle which is the very noise you are trying to end. So, let's put that question aside just for a moment and ask a much simpler one. Not how to stop it, but what is it? What is this thing we call thinking? You do it all day long, don't you? We all do. When you go to the office, you think, you plan your strategy, you navigate corporate politics, you design a product. When you go to your temple or your church or your meditation cushion, you think about God, about enlightenment, about virtue, about how to be better. When you are with your family, you think. When you are alone, you think. Even when you are being destructive, angry, or jealous, that is also the movement of thought. But have we ever, you and I, actually looked at the nature of this movement, not just its contents? Not what you think about your job, your God, your anxieties, but what is the very texture, the mechanism of thinking itself. Let's investigate this together very slowly. If I ask you your name, what happens? The response is immediate, isn't it? There is no hesitation, no conscious thinking process. The question is asked and the answer is delivered instantly. Why? Because you have repeated that name thousands, perhaps millions of times. It is a deeply worn groove in the brain. It is familiarity, constant repetition. The same is true when I ask you where you live or what your profession is. These are automatic, mechanical responses. In this, there is no active thinking. There is only the reaction of memory. This is the vast field of the known, and most of our lives are spent here reacting from these conditioned grooves, which gives us a wonderful sense of security, of certainty. Now, what happens if I ask you a more complicated question? Something you know but have to find. For instance, what is the precise distance between here and London? You pause, you hesitate. That hesitation, that time interval between the question and the answer, that is the operation of thinking. What is happening in that gap? The brain is turning inward, isn't it? It is searching its own files, its own database of memory. You are asking, have I read this somewhere? Did I see a documentary? Let me try to calculate it. You are searching, inquiring, looking, all within the archives of what you have already accumulated. This search, this activity in the time interval is the movement of thought. It is the machine whirring, pulling from its own hard drive. This then is the function of the brain, to be a vast repository of memory and experience, and to use this memory to respond to the challenges of life, to solve problems. The engineer, the lawyer, the businessman, the artist, they all think in this way, drawing from their specialized knowledge, their accumulated experience to create, to argue, or to build. But this is where the profound problem begins. The brain, whose very nature is this movement of memory, has become occupied constantly, without a moment's rest. It is always churning. This churning process, this inner monologue, is the state we live in. We are occupied with our careers, how to get ahead. We are occupied with our anxieties, the mortgage, the children's future. We are occupied with the quarrel we had with our spouse, endlessly replaying the scene, thinking of what we should have said. We are occupied by social media, scrolling through the manufactured lives of others, comparing, judging, desiring. We are occupied by the news, the global crises, the political gossip, the endless tide of information that demands our opinion and our emotional reaction. Even the physicists gossip about string theory, or the religious man's gossip about God. Is the very same movement. It is the chattering of an occupied mind, a mind that is full. The brain is constantly acquiring more knowledge, more experience, and responding from that background, and that entire cycle, experience, knowledge, memory, thought, action, is a closed loop. It is a material process, and it has filled our consciousness completely. Your brain is like a room so packed with furniture, old and new, that there is not an inch of free space. And we are terrified, absolutely terrified, of what it would mean to have an empty room. We are afraid of that state of not knowing, because our entire identity, our sense of me, is built from that furniture, from that knowledge, from that chattering. The me is the chatter. So let us go back to that third question, the one for which you had no answer at all. What happens when you are faced with a question, perhaps one of the great questions of life? What is love? Or what is death? Or who am I? And you don't instantly reach for an answer. I don't mean this superficial. I don't know, which is merely a pause before you go to Google or ask an expert or open a book. That is not knowing. That is simply a lag in the process of acquiring more knowledge, a brief stop on the way to filling your cup a little fuller. I am asking what happens when you face a profound question, and with your whole being you can honestly say, I do not know, when you are not waiting for an answer from anyone, not from me, not from some ancient teacher, not from your own memory. When you are not searching, not asking, not tentatively feeling out for a clue, you have come to a full stop. What happens to the movement of thought in that precise moment? Have you ever tried it? Or are we so terrified of that state? When you actually, authentically mean it, the activity of thought simply comes to an end. It has to, because thought, as we saw, is the movement of memory, the search within the field of the known. When the brain, which is that very machine of the known, confronts something it has absolutely no record of, and it recognizes it has no record, the machine powers down. The seeking, the asking, the searching, the churning, it all ceases. In that moment, the brain becomes absolutely quiet. It is not a dead quiet, not a dull or stupid emptiness. It is, perhaps for the first time, an intensely alert, vibrant stillness. It is simply in a state of total attention, without a motive, without a center, because it does not know. Do you see the profound implications of this? Is your brain ever in your daily life allowed to be in that state? Or is it, from the moment you wake to the moment you sleep, constantly occupied? We live in a world that worships occupation. We must be busy, we must be informed, we must have an opinion on everything. We are terrified of the empty moment, the gap between two thoughts. We fill it with our phones, with social media, with endless scrolling, with podcasts, with news, with chatter, with anything to escape the perceived horror of our own inner emptiness. And why are we so frightened? Because we, as human beings, have become so extraordinarily vain, so deeply conceited and arrogant. We are so full of other people's knowledge. We are second-hand people, aren't we? Our entire identity, the very person we believe ourselves to be, is a collage of borrowed opinions, inherited beliefs, cultural conclusions, and academic knowledge. We are what we know, our political party, our religious dogma, our professional expertise, our fashionable opinions on art or climate change. To stand in front of a fundamental question and say, I don't know, is therefore a kind of death. It feels like an annihilation of this me, this self, that is built entirely from the furniture of the known. We would rather cling to any answer, any authority, any comforting belief system, than face that abyss of not knowing. And so we fill our minds with the words of Ramana Maharshi, or the Buddha, or a scientist, or a political theorist, and we quote them, we argue about them, we defend them, we become experts on second-hand information. But the brain that is full of other people's knowledge, however profound, is not a quiet brain. It is not a free brain. It is an occupied brain, a prisoner of its own acquisitions. The truly beautiful thing, sirs, the real revolution, is the brain that has the supreme intelligence to say, I don't know, and mean it. Such a brain is quiet. Such a brain is totally unoccupied. Now, this does not mean it is an inefficient, impractical brain. On the contrary, an unoccupied brain is the most practical brain because it is occupied only when necessary. When you need to drive your car, perform a calculation, or design a bridge, you need the full force of thought, knowledge, and memory. The quiet brain uses this accumulated knowledge efficiently, precisely, without conflict. But the moment the practical task is finished, he lets go It falls back into that state of silence, of not knowing. It doesn't carry the psychological burden. It doesn't sit there ruminating about the calculation or worrying about the bridge or building an identity as the great bridge builder. It is unoccupied psychologically, and therefore it is fresh, it is new, it is alive. From this stillness, we can finally see the answer to that first misleading question. What is the source of thought? The source is memory. And what is memory? It is the storehouse of knowledge. And what is knowledge? It is the residue of experience. That is the chain. It's a simple fact. Experience, whether your personal experience from yesterday or the collective experience of mankind for 10,000 years, is stored up in the brain cells as knowledge, which becomes memory. Thought is simply the response of that memory. Therefore, thought is always of the past. Thought is never new. It is never free. It is the reaction of yesterday, grappling with the challenge of today. And because it is stored in the physical cells of the brain, because it's a chemical and electrical process, thought is a material process. It is matter. Please follow this. This is not a metaphor. Your thought is as material as the wood of this table or the concrete of this building. And if thought itself is a material process, then anything that thought creates is also, by its very nature, matter. This is a devastating conclusion if you follow it all the way. Your ideologies, which you hold so dear, your capitalism, your socialism, your nationalism, they are all conceptual structures created by thought, and therefore they are matter. Your traditions, your cultures, your flags, the borders you draw on maps for which you are willing to kill and die, all are the product of thought, and therefore all are matter. And this leads to the most difficult realization of all. Your gods are matter. I know this is an uncomfortable thing to hear. We have been conditioned for millennia to believe that God or Atman or the ultimate reality is the very essence of the sacred. But how have you found this God? You have thought about God. You have been told what God is. You have read scriptures. You have listened to priests. You have formed an image, a concept, a conclusion. You have projected an idea of a supreme creator, a divine judge, an ultimate comforter, based on your own fear, your own hope, your own desire for security. Thought, which is material, which is of the past, has created this idea, and then the mind bows down and worships the very idol it has manufactured. The statue in the temple at Tirupati is obviously matter. But the idea of God in your mind, the concept you pray to, is also matter. It is a limitation. It is a creation of the known. And in what thought has created, there is nothing sacred.